You're listening to the podcast of The Branch in Ashland, Virginia. The story of Jesus' last days seems so bleak. We go from celebration to devastation. Jesus is celebrated and then he's crucified. Even those who spent time with him weren't quite sure what to make of this ending until the surprise ending came. And Jesus rose from the dead and did everything that he said he would do. We may be fearful of the way that God works, but he invites us to come and see what he's done. Once we've seen, he commands us to go and tell. Today we look at Matthew's account of that surprise ending, what it meant for the women who were there, and what it means for us. Most people who know me know that I'm a big movie fan. A friend and I actually started a movie podcast a year ago, so talked about movies and the things that we see in them. So it's not unusual that I'll make references to movies during a message. And in 1999, a new writer and director named M. Night Shyamalan came out with a movie called The Sixth Sense. And it was one of those movies, some of you may have seen it, some of you won't. I won't spoil it if you haven't, but it's one of those movies that when you get to the end, there's such a twist in it that you feel like you need to get in line to get a ticket to see the movie again because you want to watch through and see what you missed along the way. And that kind of became Shyamalan's trademark, that all these movies that he did after that, The Village, Signs, other movies, had this kind of trademark twist at the end that would make you go, what did I just watch? What did I miss? I need to go back and watch and see what kind of things like hints that were dropped, breadcrumbs kind of along the way to see what I missed. Maybe you've seen those movies before and you've had a similar experience. Maybe you don't care about movies that much. Maybe it's a book that you read and at the end there was such a twist that you started thumbing back through the pages and saying, okay, there had to be hints along the way that told me that this is what was going to happen. Today, Easter, the day that the church, that Christians celebrate, one of the two biggest days of the year within the church, is the day that we celebrate a story that kind of had a twist in the ending. And now we already know the ending if we've read through the Bible, but think about what it was like for the people who were there that first Easter, that first morning when they went to the tomb and everything seemed bleak, everything seemed dark. We sang about some of that earlier. The thing is, when you look at a writer-director like M. Night Shyamalan, he just wrote stories, and those stories weren't true. And like Chloe read from the Jesus Storybook Bible, the difference here is that this story is true. And as we think through this, as we look through this through the lenses of those who were there that first Easter, I think it gives us a different perspective on it. And I wonder if we can even think back, like, what if we didn't know the ending? And then we came upon this ending for the first time. So even as we read through this, and each of the Gospels, they have a different sort of treatment of this at the end of each of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're looking this morning at Matthew's account of what happened that first day when the women go back to the tomb. And if you have a Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 28, starting in verse 1. It'll be up on the screen as well, the New International Version. And this is what we read. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who is crucified. He's not here. He's risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples he's risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I've told you." And so the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his hand at his feet, and worshipped him. And Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." So if we followed the story up to this point, what we celebrate as Christians on Good Friday is the day that Jesus was crucified. And as the day crept on, Jesus finally passed on the cross. They took his body down, and the next day kind of started at sundown. And so they were getting ready for the Sabbath to come. At sundown on Friday, Sabbath would come. And so there was kind of a haste to put Jesus in this tomb. And in that haste, they didn't do everything that they would normally do to a body. Or these women who were coming, they wanted to do something extra, because these are the women who spent the most time with Jesus, the ones who loved him, the ones who he had invested in. And so here, as they're coming, these women coming, there's an earthquake because an angel has come down. He's rolled away the stone. And I mean, seriously, if people think that the Bible is derogatory towards women, this is one of the greatest stories about women that I've ever seen, because the women, what do? They respond. They're just kind of chilling, right? What do the soldiers do? Now, these are Roman soldiers, okay? These are not like little dinky, like rent-a-cops riding their, Segway around the mall, right? These are like big Roman soldiers. And look at what it says that they do. The guards were so afraid that they shook and became like dead men. Now, if we're all familiar with the phrase playing possum, that's basically what they're doing. Like, it may be a southern thing, right? When you say that someone's playing possum, but the soldiers, they start playing possum. They're like, maybe if we pretend we're dead and don't move a muscle, they'll think that we really are dead. We had heart attacks because of this earthquake that came. Meanwhile, the women are there being strong and just kind of like, I don't know. Now, remember, they've followed Jesus all these years. So they've seen some stuff before. They've seen the dead rise. They've seen multitudes fed from just a handful of stuff. And so here they are, scared. And the angel, he kind of disregards these soldiers playing possum, and he speaks right to the ladies who are there. And he says, "Do not be afraid." Well, how do the women react? Well, they don't play possum. They don't pretend they're dead. They're listening. And the angel knows what they've come here for. He knows that they're coming seeking Jesus. And, we've been talking about this idea of do not be afraid over the past few weeks, if you've been with us at all. And every time that we see in Scripture that we're told do not be afraid, whether it's God telling us, whether it's one of his messengers or his prophets, there's always something that follows that. Do not be afraid, the Lord goes before you. Do not be afraid, the Lord is with you. And here the angel tells them, do not be afraid, and it precedes an invitation, and that invitation is to come and see. It might be a little scary. It scared the guards, but the women are there. They're still kind of hanging in there. And the angel says, don't be afraid, come and see. Come and see the place where Jesus laid. He's not here. The one that you're looking for, he isn't here. The tomb is empty. And I find in my own life that this is how God works. He says, don't be afraid, come and see. He's invitational. You see, we serve a God who invites us into something. He doesn't force us into something. He doesn't grab us by the neck and say, hey, let's go. He says, come and see. And he invites us, and he invited the women there. And any time that we're invited into something new, it might be scary. It might make us nervous. We might wonder, what does this all hold for me? And maybe the women felt like that. But God's invitation to us is always an invitation to know him more, to see him more. Jesus' half-brother James, when he wrote to the early church in James chapter 4, verse 8, he said, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And we're told multiple times throughout the Bible that if we seek him, we will find him if we seek him with all of our hearts. But he invites us to come. He says, come and seek me. Even in the book of Revelation, we see that he knocks on the door. He never barges in. He's a gentleman and invitational about things. And I wonder, as we think about this invitation that the angel invited the women to come and to see what was before them, is there something that's keeping us from seeking God? Is there something that's keeping us and resisting that invitation that he's given to us? Are we afraid of what he might ask us? Are we afraid of what it might cost us? Are we afraid of something else as Jesus says, come to me? And here again, not just the angel's words to not be afraid, but not be afraid, come and see. And then right on the heels of that, there's a command. And he says, go and tell. You know, the women have come here to fulfill a responsibility. And what they encounter there is not what they expected to encounter. It's one of those twists that they thought that they would come to an empty tomb. They probably wondered to themselves, how are we going to roll away this stone? How are we going to get in there? And there they find this empty tomb. And that invitation and then the command to go quickly and tell. And I just love the fact that these women have come, they've seen what they didn't expect to see, they're invited to look a little bit deeper, and then the angel says go, and they start to go. There's no dialogue here. It doesn't say that they start saying, well, where are we supposed to go? Or what are we supposed to do? What exactly are we supposed to say? So often when God invites us into something and then sends us out, we'll like second guess the heck out of that. We'll say, okay, you've invited me, but I've got a lot of questions here, God. I can imagine that these ladies had a ton of questions. And they wondered lots of things, but they had known because of following Jesus that they just needed to go and to do it. And I love Matthew's description here. He said they went away afraid, yet filled with joy. Have you ever been there before and felt that? It's like that anxiety, yet there's like an excitement at the same time. It gives me goosebumps to think about that, to think about the fact that like I'm a little scared about this, but at the same time, there's something in me that's excited. And you think about what's going through the minds of these women, that as they encounter this, they're like, oh, this isn't what we thought. And yet, they're probably thinking in their minds, remember what he said. Remember what he told us. Could it be? Is it true? And they went away filled with joy. That nervous excitement that's in them. And they've seen this angels and they knew the stories. And again, I think one of the things that we need to realize here is that in Jesus' culture, women were not the ones that you depended on to tell the story. They were marginalized in the culture, in society. They were not the ones who you said, hey, I need advice or I need someone to witness something. I'm going to choose them. Women have come a long way, and so for us, looking backwards from our culture to that culture, it might be hard for us to imagine. But it's interesting to me that in a culture where women are marginalized, Jesus comes and appears to them first. And he invites them into something and then sends them off on their way. And then another twist. Because as they're going to do what they've been told to do, Jesus himself appears to them. And so they're obedient to the words of the angel, and then they do what he told them to do, and as they're going, they encounter Jesus. And I wonder, if they hadn't been obedient, would Jesus have shown up? If they were there asking tons of questions to the angel and saying, well, so let me get this right, like we're supposed to go and tell his disciples. If they were bargaining with him, would Jesus still have shown up? But they don't. They're obedient and they go quickly, just as the angel said. And Jesus shows up, he reveals himself to them, and they know right away who it is. They believe the angel's word, and now they've seen for themselves. They have a testimony of not just an empty tomb, but they've seen who they wanted to see when they showed up here to begin with. The difference is he's not dead. He's walking and talking right there in front of them. I love the chill answer of Jesus too, right? He's like, greetings. I mean, that's all he says to them? Like, wait, we just saw you 48 hours ago. You were dead on a cross. We watched them put you in this tomb, and the first thing that you say to us is greetings? And there, that excitement and yet that fear inside them. They've got this story now to tell of an empty tomb and a risen Jesus. And I wonder if part of the problem with the testimonies and stories that we tell others is that they're not believable because we haven't seen it or experienced it for ourselves. Because we're trying to tell a story that either we don't fully believe yet or we haven't really seen and experienced. I can't even imagine what these women were saying when they encountered the disciples. Like, as they run from that tomb, they encounter Jesus, and then they go and tell the disciples. And if you look at the account over in Luke, it says what the disciples, how the disciples responded. In Luke 24:11, it says, but they didn't believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Okay. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, I talk for a living, but if this happened to me, I think I'd be stammering and saying, I wouldn't be able to get words out. And maybe that's what happened with the women as they're trying to describe it. They're trying to give testimony of what they've just seen. And they go to the 11 remaining disciples and they tell them. And yeah, just like I read, they did not believe because their words seemed to them like nonsense, except Peter. Good old Peter, right? Like, Peter never wanted to take anything, for granted. Peter, always the one, he had to be an activator. Like, it's like he's always like, ready, fire, aim. I'm going to go after this. And he hears this word from these women. And he's like, they playing, I'm going to run. I'm not going to walk. I'm going to run and see for myself. And so what does he do? Now, all the dust has settled from the earthquake. There's no angel there anymore. Jesus is gone. All Peter sees is the empty tomb. And it's interesting again because as you read through, we see the women encountering Jesus first. We see Peter seeing the empty tomb. And then eventually, everyone sees Jesus. In Luke also, we see these two men who followed him, who are walking. I mean, this here again, like, this is where I'm like, okay, people may say what they say about the Bible and that it's derogatory towards women at times, but like, men look like fools here. I mean, let's be honest, because there are these two guys here who are walking with Jesus. They've been with Jesus for 3 years. They're literally walking on the road with him, having a conversation, and they don't know it's him. Okay? So they're walking with Jesus. He's unpacking all this stuff for them, and then finally it's like the light goes off, and it's like, hey, it's Jesus. I wonder how long they walked before they finally realized, like, oh, wait a second here. And Jesus reveals himself to them, and then finally he reveals himself to all of them. And the thing that I see in this is that they don't all see Jesus at once. Jesus reveals himself separately and differently to all these people, to the women, to a few of the disciples, and then to the rest of the disciples. And it's a message to me, it's a message to us, that we need to remember that God does not always reveal himself at the time and in the time that we think he should. That he doesn't always reveal himself the same way. But that shouldn't stop us from following the message, the command to go and tell, to go quickly and tell. We need to be watching. We need to be ready. We need to be obedient to God's invitation and his command. You see, we need to come and see. We need to go and tell. And then we need to trust that he will work the rest out in his own time, not in our time. We need to trust that if we've seen him, if we've accepted that invitation to come and see, and now we've got a story of what God has done, we just go and tell that story. People might not hear it right away. They might not see it right away, but that doesn't change the fact that we still tell it. That we still go and talk about what we've seen, what we've encountered. And maybe if we're not telling the story, we haven't really encountered what we think we've encountered. It might be something that causes fear in us as well. But hopefully, like the women, we'll be filled with fear and joy at the same time. Because we know that unlike any other story, this story is true. And so, what do we do with this? Questions to ask ourselves. First one's this: what's God inviting you to come and see? Is God inviting you? Whether you've known him for a minute, whether you've known him for 10 years or whatever it might be, God's inviting you to come and see something. What is it? And then, are we being obedient when God says to go and tell? Look, I've grown up in the church. I know how the church operates. We're really good at the come and see part, but we kind of suck at the go and tell part. And I wonder if we can be as good with the go and tell as we are with the come and see part. If we can come and see what he's done, and then with excitement and fear and joy in our hearts that we go and tell. So what's God telling you to go and tell? And then finally, where do you need to wait and trust that God will still work? Like I know Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and one of the things listed in there is patience, and it's something that God's always doing a work on in me. It's hard to trust his timing in things. But if we come and see, if we go and tell, then we need to just wait and trust that he will work it out in his time. And he will, as Paul writes in his letters, that he who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. And we need to trust that he's going to accomplish the work that he has begun. We can't speed it up. We can't microwave it. We can't somehow wave a wand and all of a sudden it happens. We need to trust that in his timing, he will reveal himself in his way at his time to the appropriate people. Do we trust? Will we come and see? Will we go and tell with excitement? Let me pray. Father, you have given us the greatest gift that we could ever receive in Jesus Christ and all that he has accomplished for us. God, remind us that you are inviting us to come and see the work that you are about, the things that you've done, the things you are doing, the things you will do. And that as you invite us to come and see, that it doesn't end there, that you tell us to go quickly and tell. So may we be tellers of the good news. May we be goers into the world who talk about what you've done and what we've seen you do in our lives and the lives of people around us. And may we trust that when we sow those gospel seeds into the world, that God, you'll grow them and let them blossom and flourish in your time. God, we love you. We trust you. Help us to trust you more, knowing what you have entrusted to us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Don't be afraid. Come and see and go and tell. God is at work even when we don't see it. Are we going to be obedient to what he calls us to and trust his timing? God won't necessarily work or reveal himself in the same way to everyone, but if we wait on him, he'll do the work that he had planned in his own time. We need to trust and be obedient. Now that you've seen, will you go and tell others of the work of God in your own life? Happy Easter. Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have any comments or questions, please email us at thebranchashland@gmail.com. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share with your family and friends wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening. See you next time.